Brilliant. So welcome to our webinar all about resilience for changemakers. I'm Abadesi, the founder and CEO of Hustle Crew, and I'm really delighted to be hosting this conversation today. And I'd like to bring on my two other speakers with a bit of a question. So I'm going to ask them to tell us a little bit about themselves. Araba, I'd love to start with you. I also want to know, what was it like preparing for this conversation about resilience today?
Thanks, Abadesi. Hi, everyone. So my name is Araba. I'm a healer, writer, cultural curator, and DJ. And I'm particularly interested in how African tradition and spirituality can inform our wellness today. It was interesting for me preparing for this webinar because I'm in a bit of a transition phase where I'm actually 9 months pregnant. Hopefully my waters won't break during this call. Yeah, if you see me running away, that's why. But yeah, so this whole year has been really interesting for me because I started the year with my book launch. My first book came out in April, thank you. And then I found out I was pregnant literally like 2 days later. So a year that I thought was going to be very focused on change making and promoting my book and stuff like that has become quite focused on growing a baby and trying to maintain a safe internal environment. And considering what's going on in the world right now, of course, the thing that comes to mind for most of us is the genocide happening in Palestine, but there's also so many other things. For me, living between Ghana and the UK, there's been a ton of stuff happening in Ghana as well, in terms of our government just completely failing the people, the economy being trash. We had a huge issue with flooding not so many months ago. So the world is kind of burning. And at the same time, I am in a space where I am having to choose to be less involved than I usually would be. So it's been a really interesting year for me and really interesting preparing for this panel because I suppose my views on what it means to be resilient as a change maker, I wouldn't say they've changed because I've always known that um, you need to constantly change how you engage with change making to be sustainable. But I haven't had to put it into practice as much as I have this year before. So yeah, so it's been interesting for me preparing because it's really been usually I would be more focusing on the active part, whereas I've been thinking a lot more about how do we step away when we need to without feeling too much guilt, and how do we decide how much we need to step away. Yeah.
I love that. Thanks for sharing. I also love how in some ways you were sort of like forced into this position thinking about how to step away. But, pregnant or not, it's probably important for us to remember that it is a marathon, not a sprint, change making.
Exactly.
And we shouldn't always wait for external factors to force us to pause and rest and reset. And I shared a link to your book there. Araba does amazing stuff around breathwork and healing, and all of these things are definitely things in my resilience toolkit, but we'll come to resources later in the chat. Jaz, I would love to pass the mic to you. Please tell us a bit about yourself, and also what was it like for you to prepare for this conversation today?
Oh, this is very interesting, and actually connecting it to something that Araba said at the time that you reached out about this whole session, I was actually in Ghana experiencing those floods. So yeah, very poetic. There are many, many journal entries about being in a crowd, being so connected. And for context, I'm from Jamaica, but my family took out, which is where my husband's family's from, while watching everything unfold on social media around Palestine, and also really um, understanding what that means for me and my work, my well-being, how I show up, and so on. So even in terms of preparing for this, it started off in that space. I am a community manager by day, and I'm also a coach for ambitious careers every other time outside of that. And a lot of my work when it comes to change making is both by being that myself, I very much sit in the seat of advocate and connector, and sometimes peacemaker, sometimes troublemaker, depending on the perspective, as part of my day to day. And if I'm not doing that, I'm empowering others to do the same, to step into their power, to speak up where they feel safe to, and so on. And I think a big part of it is me reflecting on my own personal and professional experiences of acknowledging and then building my own resilience, because it's a bit of an unconscious thing that we build. So really just going through the different experiences, and actually looking a lot about the identity of being a change maker, because I think I remember many moons ago the first time I heard the word, it was like big lofty thing, somebody who campaigns, or somebody who has the title activist, or has the title advocate, or something like that. And the reality is, as you said, being a global citizen, there's so much of our day to day that calls and invites us and pulls us into change making in lots of different ways. So I kind of did that thing where I sat down, went back to like my very early existence, as a change maker, being the person who squeezed an apology out of the head of science for bullying us and different things like that, age 13, 14. So it's always been inherent, but reflecting on those moments, celebrating them, and just seeing where those skills were honed and really helped me build my kind of resilience toolkit now is a big, big thing that came up for me.
I love that. And I love that honesty around, am I a change maker? Oh, wait, actually, I've been a change maker since day dot. And this idea that really anytime we're unhappy with the status quo and we vocalize it, we're a change maker. I don't think it has to be this big deal. If you're one of the few people like you on your team and you have the courage to speak up about what could make the culture better, you're a change maker. If you are a team leader or a manager and you want to have more inclusive recruitment practices or better employee benefits, you're a change maker. If you are a content creator or posting anything online, if you're making a statement about your experience or what improvements you'd like to see, the fairer future that you dream of, you are absolutely a change maker. And I think of all the people in the Hustle Crew community as change makers. I think of all my clients that come to us and book workshops or consulting as change makers, and certainly the consultants facilitating those sessions, some of whom are in our audience today, definitely see them as change makers as well, because making change is basically just using whatever space you can take up in the moment to try and shift perspectives or shift opinion. And I think so many of us are in that position all the time. So for me, preparing for this panel was very interesting, because as someone who has done advocacy, inclusion advocacy, both as a consultant, but then also in-house in my last role as global VP of belonging, community and belonging, I sometimes have a bit of a difficult time with even the concept of resilience, because I feel like there are certain groups of people who are expected to be resilient, women of color, Black women. And sometimes that expectation of resilience almost comes with that condition that we're not allowed to check out, and that we're not allowed to opt out of the fight, and that we're not allowed to be tired. And when I think of my last in-house role, I really felt that I always had to be resilient, even in the face of quite hostile energy. So it's a challenging topic for me to explore, because while I rely on my resilience a lot, there are also times where I feel that my resilience is sometimes holding me back from getting much needed compassion and much needed support. But this kind of actually brings me on to my next question. So my next question, and I'd love to come to you first, Jaz. I'm just curious, online, IRL, have you seen greater resistance or even a backlash to efforts aimed at increasing diversity, inclusion, and representation? And the reason that I say that is because if I think of 2020 and Hustle Crew workshops being booked, I would get contacted by a tech company or a VC fund, and they'd say, how soon can you deliver anti-racism training or inclusion skills training? And I'd say, oh, okay, we have availability in 2 weeks. And they'd be like, invoice us now, let's pay, we're in. Now, when I reach out to clients that we've worked with for many, many years, they'll say things like, oh, we don't really have budget. We don't really have time. Oh, I don't know if we should mention white supremacy in that training. Can we take that out? I'm not sure we should mention ooh, privilege makes people feel a bit uncomfortable. Can we take it out? And I was like, so now we're centering the experience of the most privileged and how we design our conversations about oppression. This is weird. This isn't what we were doing 2 years ago, 3 years ago. What happened? And I see that as kind of the corporate backlash, but I'm just curious what your observations have been around the backlash, Jaz.
Yeah, my observations are really nuanced. As somebody who works full time for an organization, but also works with organizations, I've definitely seen more of a we check the box, what else do you want from me type of attitude towards inclusion. You know, I've sat in EDI related trainings at employers where folks have, you know, we're talking about biases, we're introducing the types, and they're going, you know, I use bias to be better at my job. Actually, it helps me pick people for my teams. And that tense moment where it's like, hello, and for the record, I would definitely was not facilitating. And I definitely can go into this later about like when I am employee mode, I'm employee mode. I'm not going to take over anybody's training because you've paid that person to do their thing and they should hold that room. However, there's that space where that unforgettable sort of tension takes place where it's like, okay, partly I'm glad to know that you think that way, so I know I don't need to roll with you like that. But also there's a space where it's like, wow, in 2023, you just said that out of your mouth. Okay, how do we kind of do with this? And I think there's an element where the theory is what everybody thought was the work and not the application, not the challenge yourself, not the get comfortable with being challenged, right? And that means that the true actual transformation that we try and create when we lead these sessions and these trainings and these workshops and programs, right? I'm a big fan of programs. We ain't going to helicopter in and just disappear. Let's work on cultural change. That bit gets missed. And I think a big thing that I see both as a career coach, but also for context, my role as a community manager, I'm serving a community of mostly Gen Z folks. If you don't know how to talk to them, they are diverse also by default. The community that I serve is intentionally that way. They will notice. They will be the first. It's an expectation now of that generation. I don't like to harp too much on generational things, but it is a big, big reality. They grew up in a different world. They grew up online in ways that many of us didn't. So there's a lot of stuff that you can't hide from them anymore. So they rock up on their first day going, what's your policy on like, why can't I have my pronouns, right? It's stuff like that where it's just like, why can't I? Like, what are you doing that this isn't standard? So you've kind of got that tension there where the organizations are kind of like, meh, we did it. What do you want from me?
Yeah, that's really interesting. That realization that a lot of people thought talking was the work. And when it comes to actually taking action and potentially sitting in a space of discomfort, the option to opt out of that is far more appealing. And the peer pressure is not there anymore, right? Let's face it, you know, the peer pressure is not there. In 2020, people were probably saying, oh, you haven't posted a black square, you hate George Floyd, you hate Black people. But now the conversation's moved on. And, you know, I'm not privy to the conversations white people have when Black people aren't in the room. But I'm guessing BLM ain't being mentioned the way it was 2 or 3 years ago. And a lot of the decision makers, a lot of the leaders, you know, do represent the dominant group. So yeah, those reflections are so interesting. Araba, I'm curious, like, what has been your observations online, IRL, of the resistance or backlash to inclusion efforts?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's been said so far. I mean, I think we can all agree that there has been backlash. What I want to talk about a little bit is why, like, how did we get here? And I think we're in a place of diversity fatigue, and that's because the need for diversity was never truly understood. I think these kinds of changes only really came about when white people are shocked and saddened. So when people are getting killed, or when something so visceral is happening, something that's so very obviously unfair, then people are shocked and saddened, and then they're like, okay, we need to do something to change this, and then it turns into a whole Black Square Summer. So when we take away the shocked and saddened issues, it's for Black people, we know that that's literally just a tiny, tiny percentage of what is wrong with the world, because we understand the history, the literal hundreds of years of conditioning and oppression and system building that has been intentionally created to keep us in a lower position. And that can manifest in something as simple as submitting two CVs with two different names, but everything else is the same, that kind of thing. The issue is that if people, I want to say white people, but the challenge is it's actually not just white people, it's most people. If we're being very honest, most people, no matter their background or the color of their skin, don't understand how insidious white supremacy is to our everyday lives. And so if you don't understand that, you need a shocked and saddened situation to move you into change. When there's no shocked and saddened, it's just a bit like, oh, well, why are we still doing this? We've got 5 Black people in our team now. Why do we still need to keep taking jobs away from white people? So I think that the issue is, it's just this huge education that needs to continue to happen. And yes, moments like Black Square Summer can be useful for the movement. But I think, I don't know what the answer is. Sorry, that's not very helpful. I don't know what the answer is, but I think somehow we just need to continue with this education of, okay, aside from the fact that we're being murdered by police, aside from the fact that we're having high level opportunities taken away from us, there's also these very, very basic things every single day that we have to deal with. And it's because of the last 500 years of white supremacy. So the work never finishes. You can't get diversity fatigue. It's not fair, because we're tired too. We've been tired for hundreds of years, but we need to keep trying to make the change. So yeah,
I have oppression fatigue. I have serious oppression fatigue.
Exactly.
If someone wants to release me from that, let me know.
Exactly. And I think it comes back to this thing, which we're also seeing with the issues in Palestine. It's this thing of, whenever the oppressed are being given more rights, more freedom, more money, the oppressor will always see it as something being taken away from them. And it doesn't have to be that way. There's enough for everyone, but it will always, always be seen as, I, the oppressor, am losing something. So then it's like, okay, I'm prepared to lose something for the year 2020, whatever year it was, 2020, because I'm shocked and saddened. So let me sacrifice and lose something this year. But then 3 years later, it's like, oh, but no one's really being murdered by the police anymore. So I don't really want to sacrifice anymore. So let's just stop doing the diversity stuff.
I love that. I love everything you say. And, one of the most challenging things of my work is trying to explain to members of dominant groups that comfort is not the norm. This idea of just being comfortable all the time as you move through spaces in society, as you move through spaces in the world, as you move through spaces, just being comfortable, never have to assimilate, never have to change, never have to be someone else who I'm not. That's not normal.
Yeah, sounds nice.
None of us have that lovely luxury and privilege. And it's really interesting because when people often say, Abadesi, how will I know I'm doing the right thing as an ally, as a change maker? And I'll be like, by how uncomfortable you are. Facts. If you are the person who, when certain jokes are being made, can be like, whoa, come on, we're better than this, guys. That's not funny anymore. We can't make jokes like that. And everyone goes, oh, don't be that person. And you feel a little ashamed and you feel a little uncomfortable. It's because you're doing the right thing. But you know what's more comfortable? to just laugh along, like, yeah, that's funny, that's funny. And similarly, you know, when you're at that meeting and they're like, who should we extend the offer to? And so is like, let's face it, we know that one of them's going to fit the culture better, you know. And if you're the person who in that moment can be like, but is that helping us meet our diversity goals? You know, is that helping us change? And you can, again, be so uncomfortable in that moment because you don't know what you're going to be met with. You're doing the right thing. But so few people are willing to accept that price of discomfort. And the frustrating thing about that is it's still an opt-in for many people, right? Whereas for a lot of us, it's not an opt-in or opt-out. It's just the default. So yeah, I find that really interesting. And the other thing I was going to say on this backlash thing is actually something that the three of us spoke about when we were preparing, which was the normalization of hate in online spaces. So what we've really seen more and more is just a lot of hate coming out in comments. And, you know, Araba, I think you made the point that sometimes you're posting stuff that isn't even a statement. It's not even like political. It's not even activism. It's just like a family update and someone sliding into the comments, judging, spewing hate. And I think that's another thing that has validated some of the hostility that we're seeing in real life, because we are just exposed to so much hostility online. It almost feels like the norm for people to just be popping off in comments, like rolling up sleeves, taking off earrings, starting a fight. It's just like, what are you doing? But then if that's the norm that you're exposed to when you're scrolling, why wouldn't you then say outlandish and audacious things face to face in the comfort of your office, in the comfort of your team, where you know, hold so many privileges? So yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot.
There's a huge part of that I think is on the topic of resilience. It's that side of it that makes us default into going beyond resilience. Like you almost have to steel yourself for a fight, when actually most of us who identify as change makers, we're peaceful folks. I'm trying to prompt discussion and thought and introduce perspective. I don't want to go back and forth with you in comments. I don't want to be on LinkedIn going, you know, look, I've been the person sending paragraphs internally to people to say just a few questions here, and just in case you wanted to know what definition of systemic oppression that I'm using, here's a link to an article, here's the statistic on why I think this is important. I've sent an essay via email going question mark, question mark, question mark. If we say we are who we say we are, not sure these things align, can anyone get back to me? And there's that space where candidly, that email was met with silence, and one person on the thread said, let's sit down and have a chat. And that chat was fruitful. Everybody else on the email, silence. And then one very like bashful, saw your email, thank you so much for taking the time to send it, like I'll read through links and stuff like that. And it's that sort of element where as I write something like that, I just want this to be dialogue, but I'm very open to the reality that I've sent it via email so that can be forwarded on. Let me write and rewrite all of these sentences, make sure it's watertight. Right? Last week, I came into my office, which the global majority are about 90% of the staff. And I put on my hoodie with a watermelon on it. And just as I was going out, saying bye to my husband, he paused and he said, are you sure? And I said, yeah, because I didn't buy this hoodie to be house clothes. And also most of the people in the building are in the building on Fridays. So again, I did not buy it to be house clothes. Let's see if someone speaks to me. Nobody did. But what everybody did is they did the double take. They blinked twice. Again, I'm peaceful. All I wanted was a conversation, or hoped that somebody would, even if they don't have a conversation with me, heck, even if it starts with me, oh, that jazz chick, so you see her hoodie, da, da, da. You're going to have a conversation. Let's not pretend these things that don't exist. What ended up being quite funny is that was like the few days that both the CEO and the founder of the company bumped into me. I don't get to see them very often. They also did that. We're peaceful people, but we have to create our game plan for, okay, if somebody feels offended by my hoodie, if somebody has something to say, if somebody wants me to explain everything, explain why I use the word genocide, I have to have all of my stuff in a row. And that in and of itself is an exhaustion.
What's the significance of the watermelon hoodie? Did I miss something?
So there was a time where the Palestinian flag couldn't be shown. shown. So a watermelon was shown instead. So in terms of it being shown as a symbol, it is referring to something that is definitely political, but it's not as overt.
I see. I like that. Thank you for sharing. So in light of all of the tension and negativity, I'm just really curious to hear from both of you on how you stay optimistic, because it's not like any of us have quit, right? It's not like any of us have gone, oh God, I've got so much oppression fatigue, I'm just bouncing. I'm just gonna live under a rock for the rest of existence and stop interacting with people. None of us have chosen to do that. So maybe, Araba, I'll start with you. How do you stay optimistic in the face of all this?
Well, I think one of the first things is I've become a little bit cynical, but not like bad cynical, more just like protection cynical. So like Jaz, you know, where you were talking about those emails with the bullet points and the links and everything. I think a few years ago, I would almost be willing to send something like that, like all the time, you know? Whereas now I think I understand that most people don't want to learn, they just want to be right. So you really have to pick and choose who you have those conversations with. So I've definitely become more selective in, you know, letting comments go, or, you know, just deciding, is this a battle that I'm willing to I'm willing to take, and is it something that the other person is actually going to listen to me, or are they just going to keep talking to respond? And I think that's a really, really important way to stay optimistic, because when you do talk to those people who are just talking to respond, it is just, you just feel like, how can people think this way? And you know people think this way, but you don't have to keep exposing yourself to it all the time when they're not willing to change. Exactly, having good boundaries. And then I think something else that has been really, really helpful to me over the last few years is the more I have connected with the idea of ancestors and certain aspects of African philosophy, the more optimistic I've been about our change making. I'm just wondering whether to give, okay, I'm going to try and give a really quick example, kind of definition of destiny in the Akan philosophy. Akan is like a group, an ethnic group, mostly in Ghana, in present day Ghana. And they have a really rich philosophy and cosmology. So destiny in Akan belief, it's called Nkrabia, and it is something that is decided before you're even born, before you even actually exist on this earth. It's protected by your soul, your kra. And the idea is that as you go through life, your soul is kind of trying to keep you on the path of your Nkrabia, your destiny. Everyone has a unique destiny. Every soul has a unique destiny. And what happens is that at the end of your life, that part of your soul can be reincarnated. In the Akan belief system, reincarnation is always through your bloodline. So the way I think of this is, okay, so whatever my destiny is, whatever my purpose is something that actually ancestors who came before me have been working on. Like whoever is reincarnated within me has already started that work. And then when I leave, whoever I then am reincarnated into will continue that work. So it kind of changes the timelines that we're working with, right? It's not like, oh, I need to try and make this change in my lifetime. Like, no, it's actually not about our lifetime. It's not about us as individuals. It's a continual flow of change that we have been supported with by our ancestors before us, and that will be continued by our descendants after us. So it just takes the pressure off a bit, I think, where it's like, okay, I just need to do whatever I can in this lifetime to contribute to this ongoing battle for change. And for me, it's been just so helpful to think like, okay, it's not just us who are on this call. It's not like a race against time. It's something that we're a tiny part of something bigger that will continue for hundreds and hundreds of years. So that's what me stay a bit more optimistic.
Yeah, I really like that idea of just seeing things over that longer arc of time, to not be too disheartened, really, and too impatient. And you know, with the biology we're dealing with, we do struggle to think in the long term, and we do struggle to zoom out, and we do struggle to, I can barely plan a few days ahead, let alone a few centuries ahead. Like, I'm not going to be here then, you know? So
Right.
I think that idea of like taking our headspace to a longer period of time to give ourselves grace is really moving and really, really powerful.
And I think it helps with the, you know, what we talked about earlier about being sustainable, because, you know, when you're thinking about everything being in your lifetime / in your prime, it's like, oh no, I can't take a break because the work needs to be done. And it's like, yeah, the work needs to be done. But like, if you take a year off, it feels like that feels like crazy. That feels like too much to take off. But in the grand scheme of things, if it's gonna mean that you're gonna be able to make more change and be more resilient and be able to work for longer when you come back after that year, then it's definitely worth taking that time off.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of us have to go through, that journey of not feeling guilty for taking a break. You know, Trisha Hersey, I feel, is like the ultimate idol for this to me, the Nap Ministry, and the way she verbalizes things like accessing our dream space through rest, I feel is so powerful, because it's like, how can you dream in a headspace that's full of to-do lists and tasks and other people's you know, voices in your head? You know, you need to really be rested, rejuvenated, and recharged to access this ancestral dream space, this divine dream space, whatever you want to call it, to connect to something bigger than us and greater than us. We need to be in the right, you know, sound body and mind to do that.
Yeah, 100%. We need to have moments of silence and rest and stillness in order to be able to receive those messages, gifts, whatever it is, which in the long term will actually, I'm always a bit reluctant to say like rest is productive, because it sounds like the opposite, but in the long term, it actually does make you more productive if we want to think about it in that frame of mind.
Yeah, and one of the things I did this year is Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way, which is about becoming more creative. And one of the most profound exercises in that is morning pages. And it's very simple. As soon as you wake up, you write. And it can be like 1 page, 2 pages, or 3 pages. But it's this idea, like, before other people take up your headspace, you know, the news, social media, your partner, you have this free flowing space to just think of what you dreamed of, what you thought of. And it is a really powerful exercise. And I actually found that really energizing and grounding, because it was a nice way for me to start the day with, you know, a bit of communion with myself and my thoughts and my dreams before I then go into my day. Jaz, I want to come to you, and I kind of have a bit of a twofold question for you, because I'm conscious of time. Time is flying, and I want to move the conversation along. I want to hear about how you stay optimistic, because I feel like the work of a change maker is not too dissimilar to the work of a coach, in the sense that people often come to you with their challenges, like, oh, I want to make change too, but I just don't know how. And there's this sense of like holding people's emotions that can probably become quite exhausting and quite tiring. So I'm really curious what has worked for you in terms of staying optimistic. And then I also hope that you could also start to chime in a bit on this question that got submitted by a lot of people. How do you also maintain that energy to challenge upwards? I think a lot of people are not necessarily senior enough in their organization when it comes to change. So they're probably having a lot of exhausting conversations with leadership, founders, managers about how to be better, how to do good, which again, it's not too dissimilar from coaching. You're coaching people with more power than you on how to make change. Offer us your advice.
My answer to both of them is actually, or actually, no, I'm going to disconnect it. The biggest solace that I've found is really leaning on my identity, kind of a little bit connected to what Araba shared. I had the great pleasure for, well, basically my granddad passed away at the beginning of the year, and I went to Jamaica and I put my feet in the sand, and I learned more about my lineage and the fact that I'm part Cuban, and then went into a whole of looking at the history. And there was a huge piece for me of really getting to know who I come from, and therefore who I see myself as in the bigger sort of picture. And I think that's a big thing that fills my cup, is like actually being in communities and spaces where I can be that big expansive version of myself with dreams to change the world. And as Disney as that probably sounds, it's a very powerful thing, because quite often as change makers, we are the few, or maybe the only, in that particular environment on the, the field, so to speak. So having those spaces that we can find us safe, where we can be encouraged, folks who know you, they know your heart, but they'll also challenge you to be who you know yourself to be, but also tell you, hey, have some compassion and some grace for yourself when you need to, is a big thing. So that's a big thing in terms of keeping the hope. I think the other thing for me was, I think I put it in the chat, was just around boundaries. I decide if I want to be present or not. If I'm present, I'm going to be really present and ask the questions and challenge and be plugged in. If that is actually too high a price for me to pay, I excuse myself wherever possible. So whether that looks like I'm maybe on the Zoom and I'm off camera now because I'm just not, I can't take it in, right? I'm allowed to not absorb all of these things, and I'll actually bring that along to challenging upwards. In my last role at Black Square Summer was particularly interesting, and ultimately it resulted in me having multiple conversations with C-suite leadership about my experiences as a Black person at the organization and what I think they should do, and can you have a look over our onboarding and make sure it's inclusive for somebody we've hired, and all of these things that I didn't have a problem doing. But because I'd gotten so close to the very reality of what was in the organization, I was hearing some quite ugly things that had come out of people who worked with me. Now, I didn't know who specifically said them, but it got to a point where I realized, actually, this part, I have no defenses for. You don't even know that you're meant to defend me against this type of stuff. And I essentially sent a message and said, look, I am happy to help and give my 2 cents, because this is my belief system. And if I can help, I will. If I can make suggestions, I will. But it's reaching the point where I now feel uncomfortable in my role. I didn't feel uncomfortable before, but knowing what I know now, I now feel deeply uncomfortable. And I actually love what I do, but this now shadows over me. What I ended up doing was stepping back from co-leadership of the Black ERG. And when anyone asked, they were like, why did you choose to do that? Funny enough, at that time, I was a hustle crew consultant, never been secret about that. So I had that conversation where they were like, but you're leading sessions. And I'm like, yeah, it's not my employer though. I have to have a line. Yeah, it's like, I have to have a line for that. Also, I'm being paid. This is something that people have put their coin into to say, like, we're invested in this. And I know that probably confused the CEO and the COO, because they were like, what is going on? And it was a big thing for me, because that started a shift for me in understanding, actually, that's the kind of move that made them pay attention, because it was like, oh, okay. It's a visceral thing. Like, I'm looking you in your eye and saying, I will leave this organization if I'm continually exposed to this, because I'm just getting more and more uncomfortable. And bringing that onto your second question about challenging upwards, I think the biggest thing is to be mindful of your own emotions in that sense. Don't demonize yourself for having those feelings of discomfort, anger, rage, pessimism, skepticism, all of those things. Give yourself space to process those emotions. Don't punish yourself for them. As well as intuition and gut feeling. You can talk about it all day, but look, in various cultures, mine is Jamaican, my spirit and a tech to him. That's it. That's all an elder will need to say, right? I don't even know your name. You ain't said nothing to me. We have that, and we often switch that off and keep pushing in places where we shouldn't, be in rooms where when we're not kind of being honored. I think the other thing is a coachy one, always approach with a question. Questions, again, it's prompting that thought. If you have an assumption, again, that gut feeling might be, I know you didn't. Deep breath. Is that what you meant to say? Okay, so like flipping it that way. And then the other thing which I found really powerful is really attaching your change or proposed change to the organization's declared values and principles. So I mentioned in that email, my language was, if we are who we say we are, if we have the values that we say that we value, then I really have to question these, because I want us to be congruent, right? And speaking that language that we're on the same side. I just have a different perspective that I can offer to make sure that we are all singing from the same hymn sheet in a very congruent way. So I'd probably say those are my biggest tips.
Yeah, that's amazing. And this idea of boundaries is incredibly subjective, right? And it's also incredibly nuanced, because I kind of feel that like sometimes the boundaries, we say it as simply as saying no to more things, saying no to being the Black employee resource group lead, saying no to being the default educator on diversity just because you're the person who isn't of the dominant groups. But what we don't often speak of is the risk of saying no, right? And that sometimes is very real, and it's very much there. You know, in this room right now, we have a self-employed healer, DJ, writer, entrepreneur / corporate leader, and an entrepreneur, right? So we've almost purposefully inserted ourselves into situations where we can speak quite freely without affecting the payment of our bills, as it were. However, I am conscious of the fact that many of the people in this webinar and in this community do not share that privilege. A lot of them are on payroll and are navigating complex corporate environments. And one of the things that I think we also have to give ourselves compassion for is sometimes it's hard for us to enforce the boundaries we'd like to, because we don't have the privilege of seniority yet, or we don't have the privilege of being in that right corporate environment to do that. And that actually brings me on to my next question. So I've got 2 more questions, this one, and then I wanted to end on suggestions for resources for everyone. But this penultimate question is about, how do we help change makers in the room get support from people within their ecosystem and allies within their ecosystem, recognizing the fact that it is often a privilege to stick your neck above the parapet and be a change maker, because there are some people who cannot risk ruffling feathers. There are some people who cannot risk putting their boss into an uncomfortable conversation or uncomfortable situation, whether that's because they're too junior, their command of the language isn't there, culturally, it's very difficult for them to be extroverted or outspoken. I think there's a myriad of reasons why someone who, quite frankly, could share our skin and look like us, but not necessarily have that energy or ability to challenge the way that we can. What should we be mindful of there? Araba, maybe I'll start with you in terms of finding supporters for the change we're trying to make.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really good point. I think something that has been helpful for me over the last few years, which is something that's we're going to talk about later, but I'm going to talk about it now, is this resource. I think it's called the Social Change Ecosystem Map or something, by someone called Deepa Iyer. And it basically maps out all these different roles needed in order to facilitate social change. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think what happens is when we think about big change movements, you know, we think about the Malcolm X's, the Nelson Mandelas, the Angela Davises, right? But those people were playing a particular role within a social change ecosystem. They wouldn't have been able to play that role if there weren't also the carers, you know, the people cooking breakfast at the Black Panther breakfast clubs, the people who were maybe not so visionary, but strategic, you know, the people that the visionaries would go and speak to get advice, the people behind the scenes. So I think it's really important for us to, first of all, recognize that there are so many different roles involved in social change, and they are not all the role of the leader, the visionary, the speaker. And it's important for us to realize that for ourselves, because then we can question, okay, what's my role in social change? And it doesn't have to be going to protests. It doesn't have to be speaking up. It doesn't have to be writing that email to management. And then when we understand our role, we can also start to think, okay, well, what are other people's roles and how do we fit together to be able to create the change we want? Of course, the people that are going to be visible are those people who are doing the talking, you know, setting up the group, all of that. So I think it's always good to try and, you know, align yourself with those people. And when you're speaking to them, be very honest about what your role is. You know, if you are wanting to help create change, but as Abadesi said, maybe you're not senior enough or in a safe space enough to actually lead initiatives, then you should be able to say that freely to the other people who are leading change. You know, I want to be part of this, but I can't necessarily be like the face of it. Is there something else I could do? Can I help you in the background? Can I do some writing for you? Can I, you know, design your flyer, whatever it is? I think people need to be able to feel confident to present what role they can play. And then I think in terms of finding other people, I do think that the more you speak up, the more you attract people to you. But obviously, we can't all do that. Um, I think one of the keys is intention. And this is where my woo-woo side is going to come out. But, you know, sometimes just having the intention, just knowing, okay, this is an issue that I want to have an impact on. I want to attract to myself other people who care about this as well, so that we can work on this as a community as a community to make change. Literally just setting that intention, writing it in your journal, maybe talking about it with your close group of friends who you know you feel safe with. You'll start to realize that suddenly those people start to draw towards you because you've put out the intention that you want to create this community to address a specific change. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of intention as well.
I love that. Jaz, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, there's levels to this thing. A lot of it based on the context of your organization from a cultural point of view. You know, one of the first things that came to mind was town halls. That was when I found my people, so to speak. Because when those questions on Slido are unanonymized and people are taking the words out of your mouth, I'm going to slide in your DM on Slack and go, thank you so much for posting that. Could we have a coffee? Would love to chat more. So obviously that's more of the overt sort of spaces. Separate to that, read the room, because there's a bunch of people who will agree with the question that's being asked or will raise the eyebrow when an announcement's made or certain language is used. That's naturally a little bit more subtle, but you know, folks' tone, facial expressions in response to policies, announcements, and so on could give you an indicator of people who are at least open to a conversation about the said topic. The other thing, again, this depends on culture because not every company has an employee engagement or an EDI team. But if you have one, build a relationship with them, because even if they're not doing all the things that you want them to do, you can build a relationship where they could at least let you know the lay of the land, because what you feel viscerally and you see through your day-to-day, they've got data on the back end and they've got somebody breathing down their neck going, what are we doing about the attrition in this particular team? What is going on over here? And it doesn't mean that they're going to spill all of the secrets, but they will at least say, actually, let me connect you with this person. Because in the same way that you'll have that conversation, there'll be other allies who are actually concerned about it and have been signposted to them, but a movement hasn't been formed, a structure hasn't been formed, nothing kind of has been able to move forward, because again, these teams, when you do have them in an organization, are doing about a million different things. And I'm sure Abadesi can attest to the amount of things that's on the plate of somebody who is in charge of fostering belonging, right? I'm sure they'd love to get out of the meetings and do some real work. So when you connect, they're actually quite grateful for that signposting and you raising your hand to say, look, I see what you see. Is it on the roadmap? Is there anything I can do? The other thing is social media, not just Instagram. Use LinkedIn. Share and connect with people who are talking about the topics that you are interested in. Share your perspectives there. Even if you don't feel safe or there isn't a space for you to express it internally, like on Slack or Teams or whatever it is, your colleagues are seeing what you're posting there. And actually, it might be a safer place to start a conversation over on a LinkedIn DM to say, oh my goodness, I thought I was the only one in the company that noticed that. And you can start that relationship organically over there. But I think that's a huge kind of space that we leverage it a lot over on Instagram. But I think we don't realize that there is a space for it on platforms like LinkedIn to talk about the issues that matter to you, the values that matter to you. And it's something that I work with my clients a lot on, saying, like, you know, especially those who are looking for new roles, how do I say to them that I'm an activist without putting it on my CV that I'm an activist? How do I let them know that I'm going to ask them questions about inclusion, not just diversity, but inclusion? How do I let them know that I'm going to want time off to volunteer and I'm going to continue to be vocal about X, Y, and Z online? So there's a lot that you can do strategically to vet places where your voice is welcomed or at least accepted, as well as scoping the lay of the land where you are culturally to find those other folks.
And also, I think just to add to, you know, we've talked a bit about what you should do. I think just to add something that you shouldn't do is something that I think many of us have naively done before, where you kind of assume that someone's on the same wavelength as you because maybe they look like you, or because maybe they're from a group that has been traditionally oppressed. And I think it's really important for us to remember that just because someone is a person of color or in the LGBTQ community, or maybe a person living with a disability, just because someone is in one of those groups, it doesn't mean that they get it. And even if they get it, it doesn't mean that they want to, you know, work on change. And that's one of the things that we should fight for. You know, we say that we don't want to be politicized just because we happen to be Black, you know. So I think it's really important that we, in our journey of trying to create a change-making community, we don't almost automatically opt people in because they look like they should be in the group. Because then that also, coming back to resilience, that sets us up for disappointment. It also is unfair to them. So yeah, I think that's just one thing not to do when we're trying to build this change-making community.
I love that. And just as we're coming to a close, I thought it might be helpful just to like recap a little bit and then finally ask you each to just share a resource or even point us in the direction of your work when we wrap up. But we started the conversation around the topic of resistance to change, especially inclusion change, anti-racism change, and the fact that it's harder to be a change maker now than it was, you know, 2 or 3 years ago. And that's because the purpose of this and the reason for this work is still not fully understood or appreciated by people who aren't facing the oppression that we face. So maybe that as a jumping off point can be like really helpful in your communities, just as a reminder, like, hey, why do we want to make change, everyone? Let's all get on the same page about the problem that we're solving here and the oppression that we're trying to, you know, dismantle before we even start building solutions. So if you haven't had that conversation with your community, you know, with the diversity within your community, that's a really helpful jumping off point. Then we talked about the way that each of us as individuals navigate our exposure to this negativity and how we stay optimistic. And, you know, in Araba's case, it was really tapping into her spiritual wisdom and also this idea of like zooming out and seeing that, you know, her contribution will be what she can realistically achieve in her lifetime, but the work will continue. And in Jaz's case, it was her own individual exploration of what her boundaries are, what she's willing to say no to, what she's willing to say yes to. And, you know, a lot of people put in questions about boundaries, and I would just invite each of you to go on that individual journey yourself and decide, what do you need to be saying no to more, and what else can you put into practice to protect your time and protect your energy? Because it's going to be personal to all of us, depending on the relationships we have and the roles that we have in our lives. In terms of challenging upwards, we were talking about using the right language to do that, using the right spaces to do that, and also doing it from a place where, you know, you feel safe enough and protected enough, you're not putting anything at risk. And similarly, in terms of identifying people to help, not making assumptions about who is willing to help. And then also, again, acknowledging the fact that people should be able to choose what type of help they want to give. Not everyone wants to be the face of change or the face of a campaign. So a lot of really powerful learnings there. More of this will be shared in Hustle Crew content. Follow Hustle Crew Live if you're not on social media, or subscribe to our Substack. Closing remarks, one resource, and also your social channels, please. So Jaz, you first, and then Araba, and then we'll say goodbye.
Yeah, you can find me on all platforms. My name is Jaz Marfo and my handles are justjaz.co everywhere. The website is justjaz.co. I tuck into all of this stuff in my newsletter and in my work with clients. And then the other question
was a
It's just like a resource for change makers, whether it's a book, a channel.
You know what? For me, like, actually, I'm going to say two. So Professional Troublemaker by Lovia J. It's a book, was really, really great. And More Than Enough by Elaine Welteroth. Two Black women who arguably are in media, so it's a different space, but it's the same space when it comes to Changemaker. There's some conversations that are symmetrical, but really, I love reading anything that is very real, very grounded, and evidencing to me over and over again that I can exist, I can be safe, I can share my perspective, I can have conversations, and I can really be true to me and my part of that incremental change that we want to make over the generations.
Thank you. I want to recommend Benji Kusi's book. I've shared a link there. Hope this helps, how to be kinder to yourself and others. And I think we all need a bit of that. Araba, how about you? Where can we find your work, and what resource would you like to leave us with?
Okay, I didn't know about Benji's book, so I'm going to be getting that. I would like to just talk again about the social change ecosystem. I'll just put the link there again. I think it's really valuable to actually go through the different types, the different roles, and really ask yourself, which of these is the role that I want to play? Which of these is the role that I have the skills and the capacity and the desire to play? And then just allow that to inform the change-making work that you do going forward. I think it's a really, really useful exercise. And you might find that you have like 2 or 3 of those roles, you know, not necessarily just the one. And also that it may change over time. In terms of where you can find me, I'm taking a little bit of a social media break, but you can find me on Instagram at araba.oa. And you can also join my mailing list. You'll find the link to join that when you go on my Instagram linky section. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, I just write newsletters and sometimes post on Instagram. And then I think there's already been a link to my book. I'll just repost that as well. It's available at all the major places, but if you can, try and support a local bookstore, maybe a local Black-owned bookstore. If they don't have it in stock, they can order it for you. So then at least you're still supporting them rather than using like Amazon or something.
Thank you, everyone. That brings us to the hour. I'll be sharing the recording with everyone who registered, along with the links to all the resources and books shared today. So keep following us. Next webinar will be next year. So if I don't see you before then, I hope you have a peaceful rest of the year. Thank you so much for supporting Hustle Crew. Really means a lot. See you all soon.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thanks, everyone.